want to speak this evening a bit more, maybe from a slightly different angle, about something I spoke about a few weeks ago, is the goal or the direction of practice, and specifically the idea of practicing for awakening. Before one has attained to the experience of the unconditioned, it remains entirely unknown, mysterious. It's an act of faith even to accept that such a condition exists. I think pretty much everything else in Buddhist teachings, all the essentials at any rate, we can verify by experience or by reason, and it limits the degree to which we have to take things on faith, which is one of the appeals for many Westerners of Buddhism, because it's not a religion that requires you to believe a whole catalog of things. The existence of the unconditioned and the possibility of our experience of that is something that can only really be taken with a leap of faith until it has been accomplished. So this puts the practitioner often in a kind of a precarious position of having to practice and make all this effort for something that's, quite unknown. This was when I first became interested in Buddhism, looking at different traditions of Buddhism and other spiritual paths. One of the things that really appealed to me about the Theravada was the real purity of the expression of the unconditioned, the transcendental element, this supramundane. It wasn't dressed up and prettified or personified. Particularly the oldest texts, the suttas and Visuddhimagga and so on, they're quite rigorous about not trying to pin down or define the unconditioned element. Yet that's what we're practicing towards, and it has that appeal of being expressed in that purity, but it has the expression in the Theravada has, for many people, the disadvantage of leaving the person without an image or a handle to hang the practice on. And this can be dealt with in different ways. Many traditional Buddhists will say that the idea of nibbana is too abstract and elusive, and they'll put it off indefinitely to some future lifetime and another birth, and are consciously practicing for a better rebirth, aiming for a Dewa rebirth or a happy situation in the human realm, which is okay. It's not the highest aspiration, but it's not in itself a negative thing. But one thing to be borne in mind, and this is something the Burmese teachers often emphasize, is that the only secure guarantee of not taking a lower rebirth is the attainment of stream entry, to become a sotapanna. One of the qualities of a sotapanna is that they will never take a rebirth lower than human again. There's one episode in the suttas where someone attains stream entry, and he says, hell has ceased to exist for me. And you can live a completely moral, ethical life and follow the precepts and even be diligent in your meditation. And that in itself is no guarantee of escaping from hell states, because there might be old karma in your continuum from previous lifetimes that is not yet manifest. The Buddha said that even a world monarch or even a deva of the sensual heavens, although their life is very pleasant and they enjoy all kinds of pleasures, they're still not as fortunate as a Sotapanna, because they're still subject to a lower rebirth. They might fall from that state and be reborn in a lower state. So this is something that makes it worthwhile to work towards. And you'll see that Burmese teachers often emphasize this point and give almost what you might take as like hellfire sermons. You'll be burning in the riot and dragged around by hooks. The only way you're going to escape from this for certain is to become a stream winner. To encourage a diligence in the meditators. I think it cuts even more than just consideration of future rebirth. I think even within this life stream continuum, and that someone who has attained to the stage of stream entry, who has glimpsed nibbana, will not experience hellish mind states in this life. I think you could say it's like having a floor to consciousness that you can't fall any lower than. It's not possible to spiral down into states of depression, for example, and be completely lost in the darkness. Stream winner could be melancholy, have a down time, but there's only so far they can sink, and they cannot fall below a certain level, because it is a change of the person in the depth of consciousness. It's a turning around. The Tibetan way of expressing it is a turning around in the seat of consciousness. And one thing you see often in the world of Dhamma practitioners is people speculating about enlightenment. It's almost a joke. People say that, when first time they did a retreat, they thought, well, I'll make stream entry, then on this retreat, then I'll go off on a Bermuda cruise and I'll be done with it. Coming back to a point I initially made about the mysteriousness of the experience, that the elusiveness of really the unknowability of it, I think one could say from all the evidence that the experience of stream entry is probably, in superficial aspects, is probably much less than you imagine, but in the more important, profound aspects, it's much more than you could possibly imagine. It's a fundamental change in the nature of the being, and we have to be very careful of not falling into overestimation. There's much that glitters that is not gold. And this is another common thing in the Dhamma world, and it's one common thing that is one reason why it's useful to have a teacher, is because people will have profound experiences, powerful experiences in the meditation, and be convinced that that's enlightenment, that's awakening. And it's not necessarily so. One of the very useful things that's been produced by the Burmese Vipassana tradition is texts like Mahasi Sayadaw's Progress of Insight, that detail the passage of the meditator through the various stages. And there is an experience or a set of experiences that are called the 10 corruptions of insight. And they are all very pleasant and sort of jhanic-like experiences that the mind slips into samadhi-like states and sees brilliant lights, for example, or feels extremely pleasant, becomes overwhelmed with a great feeling of faith. And often a person will want to, I got to tell everybody about this. Everybody needs to know about this, and feel very energetic, feel like the meditation is perfect. And these are in themselves a positive sign that that the mind has reached a certain level of depth and samadhi. But it's so easy to fall into the delusion that that's enlightenment when it's not. It's only a way station. And they are called defilements because you can become attached to them, because they are pleasant, and you can be blocked in your practice. Even if you don't think that it's enlightenment, you might just enjoy it so much that it takes you a long time to get through there. And on the other side of that is a state that's called knowing what is path and what is not path, Maga and Amaga. So you see, this is not the path. And you carry on. And all these experiences fade away, and it may seem to the meditator, they might think the meditation has gotten worse because all these experiences fade away and it's gotten like mundane again. But you've now passed through that. Generally, the advice is, if one thinks that they have attained to the stage of stream entry, it's useful to consult a teacher, but even then, unless the teacher is himself very advanced and can read minds, can penetrate minds, like someone like Ajahn, there's no way the teacher can confirm for sure. He might be able to know for sure that it's not. But then if it's a possibility, this person may have attained to stream entry, the teacher can't guarantee it unless, as I say, he can read minds. But what the practitioner needs to do is to examine carefully the mind for the 3 fetters that are overcome at that stage. And the fetters being personality view, attachment to rites and rituals, and skeptical doubt, to use the common translations. There's 2 things about examining your mind in this regard. One is that first you have to, and this is where some study and investigation pays off, you have to know exactly what those fetters mean and not just rely on the simple expression of the English translation, but to really find out what they actually are referring to. And then to examine the mind again and again for trace of those fetters, and not just once or twice and for a few days, but over many months, to just be on the lookout for, are these fetters still present? Does my mind fall into skeptical doubt? Does my mind fall into personality view? Does it fall into rite and ritual clinging? Briefly, the personality view is a form of self-view. It's actually the coarsest form of self-view. Sakaya Ditti, literal translation would be own body view, and it's attachment or belief in the self at the level of Ditti, which is view or theory or opinion, cognitive. Right? So that the mind believes in a self, and there's some degree of that self-belief present in everyone up until the stage of stream entry. It's not eradicated. You can attenuate it it can become much less, and which you should be doing, wearing it away, but it doesn't completely vanish until the stage of stream entry. It still leaves behind more subtle forms of view that are based on desire and based on perception, but the cognitive sense of self is eradicated. So the stream winner cannot, because of this, an aspect of this is he cannot hold either the eternalist view or the annihilationist view. There's an expression in the Pali that is very similar to our English expression when hell freezes over. It's like, I think it's when there's a cool breeze in Naraya, or it'll as soon be a cool breeze in Naraya as a stream winner will believe in the eternalist view. Take an analogy. If you think of an ordinary, intelligent, educated, reasonably, normal adult person, won't believe in Santa Claus. They can pretend, they can play in their mind with the idea of Santa Claus, but they can't really believe in Santa Claus. It's not possible. It's just like, it just falls away if it's not something they can actually believe in. So this is kind of an analogy. The idea of a self, either an eternal self or a material self, cannot really be held. Rites and ritual clinging that translation is particularly misleading. People always think, they hear that English translation, they go, I'm free of that. I don't sacrifice chickens in the backyard, or I don't have rites and rituals. It's not my thing. It doesn't really mean that. That's not even a very literal translation. Silabata paramasa, which is dependency on precepts and duties, would be a very literal translation. I like Ajahn Suchito's translation. It's not literal, but it's a bit playful, but it gets at the spirit of it. Systems and structures fondling. Fondling of systems and structures. What it really means is having a mechanical view of the mind and practice. That if I do this and that exactly as prescribed in the book, then I'll get this and that result. And I think there's funny ways this manifests. One of them is people who, on principle, refuse to partake in ritual. You get the odd person who just they won't bow to the Buddha image, for example. It's often people from some like a traditional Protestant background would find it very hard to bow to a Buddha image, and sometimes I'll make a principle out of it, and I don't do that. It's not, and that's a kind of rite and ritual clinging. Like it's a negative form. There's one of the Zen koans taken out of context and quoted often by kind of modernist types is if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And somebody said this to one of the Zen teachers, and the Zen teacher says, "You kill, I bow." So rite and ritual clinging or silabata paramasa. And the last one is skeptical doubt, which is ucheda. It's the wavering of mind. Besides being a fetter, it's also one of the hindrances that obstructs meditation. And it doesn't really mean the same thing as doubt in English, because doubt in English can also cover the idea of having an open mind, which is a good thing. To be open to experience, open to new knowledge. Ucheda is the mind that oscillates between this and that. It wants to have an answer, but it has a strong need to have a resolution to a question, and it can't settle on one or the other. So it was not able to rest in the simple open mind not knowing, openness of being open to finding out. It has to find an answer, but it can't. It oscillates. And the particular aspect of this in terms of awakening is that once the mind has glimpsed nibbana, then there's no uncertainty, there's no doubt left about the unconditioned. At the stage of stream entry, there's not yet a deep understanding of it or a great penetration in depth. But oh yeah, okay, there's something there. You know, it's like the veil has parted for a moment, and the mind realizes all this whole samsaric shadow play is, okay, that's only one way of looking at things. There's something else too. So the mind never falls into doubt about the nature of the Dhamma or whether it's worthwhile or so on. So one has to look very carefully in the mind for these three fetters. And if they're still present, then the mind has not yet reached that stage of awakening. The way to get there is the practice of the Eightfold Path, which can be simplified into the three factors of sila, bhavana, panya. Sila being the precepts, the ethics, to live in a moral, clean way. Is the foundation stone. And bhavana is the development of meditation, particularly samadhi, development towards jhana. And panya is wisdom, the understanding and penetration of the nature of reality, which is what finally gets you there. The development of samadhi, moving the mind into deeper states of stability and unity, is itself not liberation, but it's moving you in that direction. And it has a very important, well, it has more than one, there's many important reasons for doing it, aspects, but one that in this context that I'd like to emphasize is that it's a peeling away, a simplification of samsara. That the mind in jhana is no longer in the sense desire plane. It's in the plane of form. So it's like a whole big level of complication, attraction, aversion, fascination, fear, desire. A whole big layer of that is temporarily shed, and you can see the mind in a more refined state, which is our default mode of consciousness, is sense desire realm consciousness, kama bhumi. And the various concerns and defilements, desires, fears that the mind experiences are at this level predominant in the sense that they're the most noisy. They take the most attention. They're clamoring, and they're all the time there. But they're not the deepest. They're not the most fundamental. And when those are quieted down, you can see what lies beneath. And those are the remaining defilements that are still present in the realm of form, which is the desire for existence, bhavatanha, and the desire for non-existence, vibhavatanha, and various permutations of those. There's a desire for existence in the form realm, desire for existence in the formless, desire for existence in the sense desire realm, and various levels of desire for annihilation. And there's also defilements like restlessness, ignorance, and false views, confusion, are deeper than the sense desire defilements. So it becomes, an exercise in simplifying the mind and seeing it at a more fundamental, a more primordial level. And this clarifies the work. Now you see, okay, there's all this other stuff underneath the noise of the sense desire experience. The very simplest possible state of mind that's still samsaric is the state of formless abiding of neither perception nor non-perception, which experiences the minimalist samsaric experience. There's a pretty neat metaphor in the Visuddhimagga to try to explain why it's called neither perception nor non-perception. He says this applies to all the mental factors like consciousness and feeling as well. You can't really say there's perception, you can't really say there's not perception, because there's a subtlety of perception that's very, very refined. And he says it's like as if a monk had put oil in his bowl to protect the metal for storage. And then later someone was going to give him rice in the bowl to eat, and he'd say, don't put it in there, there's oil in there. But then if somebody else said, oh, there's oil in his bowl, can I have some of your oil, Bhante? I want to fill up my lamp. No, there's no oil. And then he gives another similar one as a monk and a novice are going out for alms round, and the novice sees a puddle up in the road ahead. He says, Bhante, you should put your sandals on, there's water. And the monk says, oh, there's water, give me my bathing cloth. No, Bhante, there's no water. Okay. So neither perception nor non-perception is the most refined kind of mind that's still existent in conditions. There's a really fascinating talk that Ajahn Mahabua gave shortly before his death. I don't know if it was his last talk, but it was certainly his last important talk that got widely publicized. It's called Arahato Maga, Arahato Pali, the path and fruit of arahantship. And you can find it easily. We've got at least one copy in the library, and it's also on the internet. It's been translated into English. And he is quite bold and explicit, talking about his own experience of arahantship. So it was, of course, controversial at the time because it's actually a Vinaya offense, but I guess he's always been sort of a maverick, and if you're already an arahant, and you can judge for yourself whether making a pachiti offense might be worth it to illuminate people. But he's quite explicit about it. One of the things he says is that for a long time in his practice, he came on this like a brilliant light, and he would sit in this brilliant light, and he thought that was it, that was awakening. And he abided in that state for a long time, and then he realized that's not the end. And he says that the brilliant light, which is actually something that many schools of mysticism strive for, is the white light, the brilliant light. And he said that white light is actually the last manifestation of avijja, of ignorance. It's the very last experience of samsara, when you are able to see that as impermanent suffering and not self, as condition, and let it go. Then he experiences the complete nibbana. So that image can also be a useful way of looking at samsaric reality, turn it around. And as long as you don't take it too literally, you can think of things as concentric circles, with nibbana at the center, and as light radiating from the center is experienced in successive degrees of coarseness. The formless, the form, and sense desire realm. As you go out from the center, things become more diverse, more complex, more variation. And as you go in towards the center, things become more peaceful, more simple, more immediate. Yeah. But there still remains this complete separation between the conditioned and the unconditioned. But you can pare the conditioned down, simplify it to make the crossing over easier. And what needs to happen in the mind to access the unconditioned is often expressed in the three words Nibbida, Viraga, Nirodha. Nibbida is one of those words that's really untranslatable. There's no single English word that does it anything close to justice. Some particularly older books have translated it as disgust, which I think has a totally wrong kind of connotation. I think the closest I've seen is disenchantment. The mind begins to lose the fascination with the samsaric process. And it's almost like you're bored with it. You know, you're sitting in meditation and seeing object after object, and they're all empty and impermanent. And how your mind normally works is chasing after these objects. And this is the nature of dukkha, is that no object is perfect, no object is completely satisfying. So the mind takes the object and, oh yeah, it's not quite right. Oh, what about this one? And the mind jumps and goes for the next one. And oh, this shiny thing over here, oh no, it's not so good. And the mind is continually fooled. It's like the carrot in front of the donkey. But with the meditation, you're working, the vipassana meditation, you're working for clarity of seeing, which is what vipassana means. You're working to let the process continue, and you're trying to observe it neutrally. So the nibbida happens gradually as the mind begins to lose this kind of zest for the next exciting thing. It's just more of the same stuff. It's just the variations on a theme endlessly. So the mind has not got that pushing interest in it anymore. And this allows viraga to arise, which is literally dispassion, that the passion for experience fades, that the impulse dies away. Is the second noble truth is tanha, is the desire, is the cause of suffering. And tanha in the dependent origination has a role in generating the new cycle. It's really the energy underneath the whole of samsaric existence, is this push, the desire. We're experiencing all these variations of existence because we want it at the bottom. You know, the mind is desiring existence, and that creates existence. And this viraga is the fading of that. So the energy is going out of samsara. It's like the engine's running down. And nirodha is the cessation, the ending, the fading away of the process. The process stops. And that allows the mind, no longer distracted by the process of samsara, naturally experiences nibbana. If it's not doing the conditioned, it then lights upon the unconditioned. It sounds very straightforward and simple when it's kind of put in those terms, and it is ultimately very straightforward and simple, but it can be a long haul, a lot of work to get there, because we are so mired in the conditioned. For so many lifetimes we've been playing this game that is really unwinnable. There's an old song about playing solitaire till dawn with a deck of 51. You know, it's sums up the nature of samsara. Keep dealing those hands again and again. So I think I'll leave it at that for today.